Sibling rivalry. Yeah, if you grew up with brothers or sisters, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? The fights over the remote, the arguments over who got more attention, maybe a slammed door or two. But what if all that squabbling was actually something much bigger than just a phase? Well, let's get into it, because researchers at UCLA are looking at this whole family drama in a completely new way.
And that brings us to the big question they're asking. Is all this fighting just a normal, messy part of growing up? Or could it actually be a serious risk factor for a kid's future? I mean, when you frame it like that, it suddenly goes from being a private family headache to a real scientific puzzle with huge implications.
And this is where you can really see the gap between what we think we know and what the science is telling us. On the one hand, you have the classic view, right? Oh, kids will be kids. Don't worry, they'll grow out of it. But on the other hand, the scientific view is, well, it's a lot more serious. It sees this conflict as a training ground for aggression, a major sign of future mental health, and, yeah, even a public health concern. So what's with the huge disconnect?
Well, believe it or not, a big part of the problem isn't just in our living rooms, it's actually in the halls of academia. For way too long, the study of family conflict has been a really fragmented science.
So what does this family science fragmentation actually mean? Well, it's pretty simple, really. All the experts studying this stuff are basically working in their own separate bubbles. They're all looking at one piece of the puzzle, but because they hardly ever talk to each other, nobody's seeing the full picture.
And here are just a few of those bubbles, these academic silos. You've got developmental psychologists who see it as a normal part of how kids grow. You have clinical psychiatrists who see it as a red flag for mental health. Sociologists are looking at the whole family structure. And now you even have experts in information studies looking at how our digital world is changing things. Each one of them has a critical piece of the truth.
So how in the world do you solve a problem that's all broken up into pieces? Well, you connect the dots. And that's exactly what UCLA proposed to do. Assemble a dream team of experts from all these different fields to finally get them all in the same room, talking.
And this is that dream team. Just look at the incredible range of minds here. We've got everything from neurobiology to sociology to educational psychology. Every single one of these scholars brings a totally unique, totally essential perspective. So let's just zoom in on a couple of them to see how their work starts to build a much bigger, more interesting picture.
First up, we have Michelle Krask. She's a top expert in clinical psychiatry, and her whole focus is on decoding the hard science of anxiety, getting to the bottom of why conflict in a family can get so stuck and become so damaging over time.
And her work leads to this really powerful idea called inhibitory learning. Now get this, she says the goal isn't just to stop a fight and get everyone to calm down. The real goal is to help a child learn a much deeper lesson, that disagreement itself is safe, that you can have a conflict, you can get through it, and you'll be okay. That completely changes how parents should think about stepping in.
Okay, next up is Dr. Daniel Siegel, who you can almost think of as the translator. What he does is he takes all this incredibly complex science about the brain and gives us simple, powerful ways to understand what's actually happening inside our kids' heads when things get heated.
And his most famous tool is the hand model of the brain. So your fingers are like the logical upstairs brain, and your thumb, tucked inside, is the emotional downstairs brain. When a kid has a total meltdown, Siegel says they've flipped their lid. That emotional brain has completely taken over. And here's the crucial part. Logic is useless at that moment. You can't reason with them until you connect with their feelings first.
But, it's not all just about what's going on inside our heads. We also have to look at the world the family lives in. And that's where a sociologist like Dr. Megan Sweeney comes in, because she studies the actual structure of the modern family.
And her research turned up this pretty startling fact. Get this. More than 30% of children in the U.S. now live in families with what she calls sibling complexity. That means they've got half-siblings or step-siblings. This isn't some fringe number. It means the so-called nuclear family isn't the default anymore. And all this complexity brings new kinds of conflict over things like resources, attention, and just figuring out where you belong.
So we've got the brain science, we've got the family structure, we've got the mechanics of anxiety. Okay, now this is where the real magic happens. What happens when we stop looking at all these ideas separately and start connecting them? The potential for new insights is just huge. Let me show you a really powerful example.
All right, let's talk about that modern-day nightmare, the fight over screen time. First, you start with Dr. Siegel's flipped lid, that state where your kid's emotions have totally hijacked their logical brain. Then you bring in Dr. Sarah Roberts, the information studies expert, and she points out that social media algorithms are literally designed to make us outraged and keep us in that emotional state.
So no wonder Dr. Logison's work on social scripts, the logical things a parent might say, is doomed to fail. You can't reason with a flipped lid. And this leads to a whole new rule. A fight over a phone isn't just a simple behavior problem. It's a fight against a brain state that's being deliberately triggered by an algorithm. That's a game changer.
This kind of insight is just so powerful. But, these big ideas are pretty useless if they just stay locked up in an academic journal. The whole goal of this UCLA roundtable is to create a new blueprint for families to turn all this theory into real-world practical tools.
And just look at what that could lead to. I mean, we're talking about everything from brand new training for therapists and teachers to policy briefs that actually tackle family inequality, and even a podcast to get this info directly to parents who need it. This is about making a real, tangible difference in people's lives.
So the big takeaway here is pretty clear. The reason sibling rivalry has been so hard to figure out is because we've been looking for simple answers to a really, really complex problem. The only way we're going to make progress is by bringing all these different perspectives together to build a much more complete picture of what's really going on inside our homes.
And that leaves us with one last pretty fascinating question to think about. If this kind of teamwork can help us decode the hidden science of something as common as sibling rivalry, what other parts of our family lives, all the anxieties, all the connections, all the mysteries, could we finally truly begin to understand?